I'm Kauffman, and I'm on a mission to connect with every creative writer in the world. I need your help. The world is constantly changing, which is why it's our duty, no, it's our responsibility to inspire creativity. My creative writing tips, tricks, and strategies are gonna help you become a better writer, so that way you can beat procrastination. Do you have a story that you're dying to tell, but you don't know what to do next? I can actually help you craft a story today. Welcome to Kauffman Writes, the first creative writing show on the internet for inspiration, motivation, strategy, discussion, advice, and maybe a little bit of procrastination. But don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Welcome to Dynamic Dialogue Thursdays. And today we're going to be focusing on how do you craft complex dialogue that really makes your characters stand out. So I'm super excited. Dialogue has been one of my biggest learning journeys. I can say that for sure. Hey, welcome to the stream, Stephanie. Welcome, my friend. And as you can probably tell, I am not in my normal studio today. So I'll be traveling for the next week or so. And since I'm out of the studio, my weekend's going to shift around a little bit. I will still be doing the Saturday reading and critique show. So don't forget, if you have a story that you want read aloud or you need feedback on, send an excerpt to me right now to thecreativeghostwriter@gmail.com. I will throw that in the comments, thecreativeghostwriter@gmail.com. Send me the excerpt and I'll read it aloud and give a free critique for this Saturday show. Now, because I'm out of the studio, Sunday we'll be doing, I'll be skipping the second episode of my new podcast, Creative Right Now, and we'll be resuming that next weekend. So today, dynamic dialogue. How do you build dialogue that really resonates with your characters? And by the way, if you're watching this on the replay, don't worry. You can actually skip ahead to the part of the video that brings you the most value. That way you don't have to watch through all the different parts. All right, so how do you create dynamic dialogue for your characters? Now, this has always been it's been a journey for me because in my early days of creative writing, dialogue was something that I used to really struggle with. And I asked myself, like, how do I create dialogue that feels believable? I've tried so many different strategies and different methods, and let's dig into them. So let's go over a couple tips, some things that I've learned over time. So when I think about dynamic dialogue, let's first off start off with what makes dialogue feel authentic, what makes it feel real, what makes it feel believable. Hey, what's up, Isabella? Welcome to the stream. Welcome. Thanks for dropping by. And even then, Stephanie, Isabella, both of you, I know you have both created characters who have some really cool dialogue. So I definitely know you can probably resonate with this. Now, when I thought about my early journey and what I really struggled with, a lot of the times I wasn't sure how to craft dialogue that was believable to the character. So things that I tried practicing, let's practice. Let's blow that up. I want to make sure you can see this. And let me blow up that. And Comic Sans. All right, perfect. There we go. So you can see it. So things that I did to practice, I would go listen in on real conversations. Because you want to be able to format your conversations and your dialogue based off real things that people are talking about. You want to be able to understand the way that conversations flow normally. Now that's the only thing. That's not the only thing you do. You want to take that as a framework, and then in your own writing, you have to revolve the flow of dialogue around what your character's goals are and what you're trying to achieve for the scene. So the first thing I tried doing was I listened in on real conversations. I also read a lot. So every author has their own style of writing, and this can be very, what's the right word? It can be very obvious for dialogue, because we have so many characters that speak differently, say different things, and do different things. So reading a lot allows you to see different styles of dialogue that people use. Now, by the way, if you're struggling with dialogue, if that's one of your weaknesses, I'm actually going to touch on common problems that writers struggle with when it comes to dialogue. So what we'll do is I'll touch into common dialogue problems after our 20-minute writing sprint. So stay tuned till after the writing sprint, and we'll touch into dialogue, and we'll do a Q&A if you have any general dialogue problems. Hey, what's up, Mommy Tally? Welcome to the stream. Hello, Isabella. I'm making fajitas. Ooh, that sounds wonderful. Please send some fajitas my way. That sounds really great. Thank you so much. I was like, I wish I was making fajitas right now. That sounds tasty. Oh, Auto Mod. Hey, welcome, Bobicus. Welcome. Dang, I forgot to say orbs instead of eyes. When you're like writing something and the autocorrect says something completely different. I think that happened to me a couple times before, and then what the autocorrect said gave me an idea for something even better. Awesome. So when I was practicing dialogue, I would listen on real conversations and read a lot. Those are just 2 research tips. And then in the story itself, so those are my research tips. And then in the story itself, what was the things that I was actually doing? So I actually have a bit of a process when I'm working on my dialogue. So step number 1, let's say you're framing it after your main character. Let's just say that we're practicing dialogue between 2 of your biggest characters. So the first thing I like to do is I don't worry about how it's going to sound. The same with rough drafts, the same with second and third and fourth drafts. I like to just put out there and start with what comes to mind, right? And whether that's, I feel like that's the character speaking, or whether I feel like that's me trying to like talk to the plot, that can change. And the goal is just to put out the dialogue that you feel that feels right for the first step. So I'm just going to say, create the dialogue for the scene that feels right, or or what comes to mind initially. Now, that's all right. This first step, like the dialogue might not be that great. That's all right. Totally understandable. So after we do the dialogue after you have this rough draft of the dialogue, what you're now going to do is you're now going to connect it back to your character. The number one reason why dialogue at times doesn't feel believable is because the dialogue doesn't always feel like it's authentic to whatever the character is that you've created. This happens for a lot of writers, actually. So you want the dialogue to feel believable for your character, right? So dialogue a lot of times can go hand in hand with character development because, of course, the things that characters say help them grow. But I think it's important to keep dialogue in its own category because dialogue is so important, so critical for moving your story along. And dialogue doesn't always have to be character development. Sometimes dialogue can be things the characters are saying to build upon the greater world. It can be things that characters are saying to further the plot. Sometimes it can be a mix. Sometimes it can work towards character development, plot building, and world building. It really just depends on what your goal and motive is of the scene. So once you've created the dialogue for the scene that feels right, or what comes to mind naturally, you want to ask yourself, what does this piece of dialogue, and we'll just start with just like one phrase, for instance, does this piece of dialogue feel authentic to my character? And this is the question you have to ask yourself, right? Now, this is hard when you're first starting your story because you're still trying to like flesh out your characters, which is why if you're doing this for like a rough draft, just like say things that like need to be said through the plot, and things that you think like, oh, the character might say, because then in the rough draft, or not in the rough, in the second draft, and when you're making edits, you can then go back with this method, looking at the dialogue when you're saying like, does this dialogue feel authentic to my character? Yes or no? And when we start doing, when we dig into character development and we pair it off with dialogue, things that make dialogue stand out, and things that further make the character stand out through dialogue, is what are unique things that your character says. A very easy cheat, and like, listen, you're going to want to hear this, a very easy dialogue cheat, if you're struggling with dialogue, is this. Give your character a word or a saying or a type of style that is authentic to that character, that is unique to that character. Give and try different things out. So if you're like, my character doesn't really, it sounds very bland, have your character always say like, throw in like corny phrases, or have your character always trying to make jokes that don't work. Have your character always use specific word choice. And I'll throw this back up. Throw us under tips. Nope, tips. Have them say, give your character's dialogue a unique flavor. You can do this by having them say jokes. Have them say specific words. You can have them speak in a certain like style. Like maybe your character likes to speak in like short sentences because they're a very short individual. Speak in a certain style. Now, the reason that step one was important, when we think back to the research, the reason research is important is because when you listen in on real conversations, when you listen in on things that people are saying, that's actually going to give you some indication. Everybody has a way of speaking. Everybody has a style. Now, if we copy word for word what people are saying, not always going to be the most engaging. Conversations in general aren't the most engaging to listen to from a pure storytelling standpoint, unless someone is literally telling a story. most of us tend to speak in things that we need, and a lot of people generally aren't present a lot of time and are listening and thinking about what they're going to respond to. So that's why it's not always effective for taking it piece by piece. But it is interesting when you're listening to someone speak, if you take it as like an overall of being like, okay, so this is kind of like their style, like, or think of a friend, think of a family member, think of an acquaintance. When you think about them, you probably know, like, oh, you probably have a feeling or a gut feeling of like the way that they speak. You probably know that one of your parents always says something a certain way. There's a reason that the common trope for fathers and dads is there's always corny dad humor. That is a trope. That is a stereotype. You can, of course, use stereotypes. I always recommend, if you're struggling with coming up with things to say or styles, start with a stereotype. Stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. But the fun part is start with what works, because we know a stereotype works for a reason. Start with the stereotype. And then when you're editing or when you're coming up with new ideas, ask yourself, how can I adjust this stereotype so it's the same but different? Most stories that we've written, or most stories and just like the history of stories, even anything that you could come up with today, has probably already been written, that style, that idea, in some way, shape, or form. Our goal is to retell a story in a way that's unique to our experience, because then that's what is authentic, and that's what connects to people. Let's see, Stephanie. I think I had a little problem with dialogue in my older books, but the more I know a character, it helps me know what they would say and what they wouldn't say. And that's why, Stephanie, that's a really great point. So a lot of the times, writers will struggle with dialogue when they're first starting out on new stories, when they're first developing their characters, because they still don't have an idea of the types of things their characters would say. Now, if like yourself, Stephanie, I know you've been writing for a while. Now, if you're out there and you've been writing for some time now, you probably have gone to a point where when you get to a certain point in your story, your characters probably come to life for you, and you start getting that hang of like, okay, dialogue, like this is the thing they would say, and this and this. And that's perfectly all right. That's a great thing. That's where you want to get to, right? When you can literally write a piece of dialogue and you're like, you know what? My character would not say this. Or, you know what? This is the exact thing my character would say. That's the point you want to get to. And these research tips, this dialogue strategy, and some of these tips for specific like flavor things will help you out in getting to that point a little sooner when you're struggling to come up with specific dialogue, with like specific dialogue and things to say. If you want to know like specific things to say for a character and you have like no clue what they would say, ask yourself this. Another pro tip here. If you have no clue what a character should say and you're just like mind blank, you want to ask yourself, what does the character want in this moment, and what is the plot? And this is easily translated to your life. Think about you in this present moment right now. Yes, I'm talking to you, the viewer. Think about what is it. I'll pull myself up here. So think about what is it that you want right now. Is it that you're wanting writing advice, writing motivation? Are you hungry? Are you distracting yourself? You tired from work? You doing schoolwork? Anything. Think about what is it that you want in this moment. Then also think about what is it that you want deep down in maybe the week or your life goal right now. Translate that to your character. Same exact thing. And then if you're layering on, what do they want right now? And for now, just focus on what does your character want right now. Some of those other things go a little bit into character development, which I love character development. We'll be doing some character development work tomorrow. But surface level, what does your character want right now? And think about it, right? Does your character want a candy bar? Does your character want to defeat the bad guy? Are they trying to win the girl? Are they trying to kill a certain someone? Are they trying to get a power? Once you have what they want, then ask themselves, how could what they're saying get them a step closer towards what they want? And that's my strategy. Let's see. So that was just a couple of tips, couple of strategies that I've tried and some best practices. Let me know if that helps. Definitely drop in the comments below if these types of strategies and tips helps. I love hearing from you guys, and I love hearing your experience. Stephanie, I've been writing for 17 years. Yeah, I'm like, once again, Stephanie, I'm so proud for you. It's like makes so much sense why I resonate with your experience, because I've been writing my entire life. I'm like, man, how old am I? I've been writing since I was like 7 years old. And let's see, Mammy Telly. I did a dialogue exercise bar scene and read it to my writing group. I was told that conversation is going on in every bar in America. That is very, very true. Maybe also try adult to child and other relationships as well. Yeah, so that's actually a really great point you bring up. So you want to like ask yourself, so first off, what's the type of story that you're writing? If you're writing a children's story, probably going to a bar isn't the best setting for a children's story. If you're writing a fantasy story, what are great places where people are just talking? A bar would probably actually be a little bit better. If you're writing like a comedy, bar would be a great place to practice. Coffee shops are great places. Public settings where you can overhear people talking. Coffee shops and bars are always great. Restaurants, hit or miss, depends on the restaurant. Let's see, what are other great places? Live events can be really, really great actually, because live events tend to be a form of escapism. So people are usually talking about the things that they love and the things that they enjoy. So live events, that includes like festivals, concerts, um, any type of event where you're not sitting down in a closed audience and watching, right? So if it's like you're watching the orchestra or a movie, that wouldn't be good because clearly we're not talking. But if you're doing something where you're walking around or you're interacting with people or people are interacting, it's a perfect area to try it. Thanks for sharing that, Mommy Telly. That's a really good point that you bring up. So think about what style of book that you're writing or what style of story that you're writing, and then try to pick an area to listen on some dialogue that actually would help you the most for whatever style best works for you. Yeah, and if you're doing like a children's story, like what better place going to a library, because you're probably going to have like maybe a park. Park might be better for like really being able to practice. I'd have to think about that for children's. Hey, what's up, Atomic? Welcome, my friend. Time flies. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. No worries. You know that moment when you're like, you've been busy working all day, or you're like been working on something and you're like, wow, it's already this time already. Totally happens to me. We were actually we just went over a dialogue segment. Welcome, by the way, to Dynamic Dialogue Thursdays. Where I was going over a couple of good strategies, some tips, some dialogue spiel that should help any beginning writer who struggles with dialogue. So if you missed the last section, make sure on the replay to go back and watch the first 15 minutes. It was probably pretty helpful if dialogue's one of the things you struggle with. Now, as if you have any like specific dialogue problems, or if there's any areas of dialogue where you're like, you know what, I suck with dialogue. Like, I hear you, Kauffman, but dialogue's a problem for me. If that is you, drop your questions below. Stay tuned because we're going to do our 20-minute writing sprint, right? You know, we can't call ourselves writers unless we're writing, but don't worry. Let's say it's been a busy day for you. You can kick back and relax. I'm going to throw on some cool music by our very own Atomic Elf. And then you can sit back and read. You can kind of follow along in my process while I'm working on that scarecrow. Or if you're feeling creative, you can do some brainstorming, editing, the whole shebang. This is the writers group that you've always wanted. So let's hop into that. And while I'm queuing up the music, are you enjoying the stream? Don't forget to follow and subscribe. That way you'll be alerted when I go with my daily live streams with writing motivation, tips, strategies, and all the stuff. And I have weekly writing short videos and long form videos to help give you that right motivation. So that way you don't deal with writer's block, and that way you'll continue to learn skills and get that story of yours to that next draft. So follow and subscribe. Okay, and that brings us to our writing sprint. By the way, Atomic, thanks again for the I'm like really digging this vibe, actually. I'm really, really enjoying this music. I like that this one's a little more upbeat, and then the other one's kind of a little more mellow. So I'm kind of getting like this nice, like dynamic range between the two. It's kind of cool, actually. Okay, so that is what I got there. Let's pull up the last scarecrow. Oh, there we go. Good old scarecrows here to save the day. Oh, we just hit a high moment in this last scarecrow. So let me get here. By the way, friends, I hit such an exciting point in my last scarecrow journey the past couple of days. I went back to my outline, revised it, then revised the next section to the end. I'm like so excited. I want to say that right now I'm on chapter 33. I think this story is going to end roughly at 50 chapters. So like, be prepared because there's some intense things coming up. Okay. All right. So 20 minutes on the clock, and it's time to write now. Hey, what's up, David? Thanks for dropping by the stream, my friend. Welcome, welcome. I do this live writing process daily where I'm writing my story Last Scarecrow. Feel free to keep reading along. I have been having a lot of fun live streaming this. All right. I feel like that was a good little stopping point for me. All right. So I feel like that was actually a pretty good writing sprint on my part. I was pretty happy with what I accomplished. I think I ended up making that more of a 25, 30-minute sprint because I was really into that section. We're having a small downtime moment where we're going to get to do some character development, but I think it's a lot of the character development that's going to happen right now has to be very focused on the plot and how these characters are going to affect this last 30% of the story. So because I'm about to lead into another big moment that's coming up, another big plot moment. Yeah, without giving too much away. So we just had this really interesting moment where we've learned a lot. Technically, like, it wasn't an action sequence per se because there wasn't anything that crazy that happened, but we learned a lot, and it was probably the next big reveal in the story since Crow's death. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think there's a lot of fine tuning. I think there's a lot of character development opportunities in this back half of the novel because I have so many more characters that I've introduced, right? To make them each one feel like a unique character instead of just having the hags come across as a collection. So a lot of fun, really, really good stuff. I hope your writing has gone well too. I hope you're getting some good writing done or some good ideation or development. So as we're wrapping up and we're thinking about common dialogue problems, what are problems that you deal with when you're trying to develop dialogue for your stories? For me, when I've seen common dialogue problems, oh, by the way, if there's any specific things you struggle with or something you need a question answered, drop it in the comments below. Be happy to talk through them with you. So common dialogue problems that I've seen, I would say the number one problem is speech tags. What is a speech tag? Now, you probably know it. If you've been writing for a while, you're probably very aware of what a speech tag is, but it is he said, she said, right? It's that whenever you tag either before a piece of dialogue or after a piece of dialogue with the thing the character says. Now, every writer has a different style. You need to make sure that whatever piece of dialogue is being said is clear and it's obvious like who's speaking, right? If your reader doesn't know who's speaking, they're going to get lost very, very easily. And that's a bad thing. We don't want your character to get lost. We don't want your reader to get lost. Maybe we want your character to get a little lost. That's probably part of the journey. So we don't want your reader to get lost, hence why we have to use speech tags. But a lot of the times, the two instances that I see with writers, especially beginning writers, is I see a lot of either using speech tags too much, like every single piece of dialogue has a speech tag, or not using speech tags enough, and very little of them have speech tags. You generally want to find a mix between using speech tags and not using speech tags. Generally, in scenes where there's two characters, it's pretty easy to get away with speech tags the first couple of times and then letting the rest of the interaction speak for itself, quite literally speak for itself. Sometimes, and especially more with like groups, that's when you have to rely more on speech tags because there's multiple characters talking, obviously. So with my own writing style, I tend to rely a little more heavier on speech tags because my specific style, I actually like to incorporate speech tags with action. And I think that's just something that's unique to my own writing style. So, like, for instance, I have a character who says something dynamic. And then instead of saying they said this, I like to do they exclaimed and did this thing. I think that's something that I like doing, because I like doubling up a specific thing said with a specific movement. For me, I think that helps keep readers more in the present moment. But once again, every writer is different. That's just a style that I like. So I tend to lean a little bit more heavier on the speech tags. Now, when I go back through like my second draft, my third draft, it's absolutely going to be opportunities to cut down. I think I'll definitely have some opportunities. So that way it doesn't feel unnecessary or doesn't feel like it's extra. What you don't want to happen is you don't want your reader to go through your rereading your story and for them to get distracted by the character's dialogue and then them saying, he said this, she said this, he exclaimed this, she exclaimed that. You don't want them to get distracted by those pieces, because that at heart is the problem that we're trying to avoid. So speech tags is a common one. Let's see, comments. Hey, what's up, John? Welcome back to the stream. Wow, every night alive. Yes, John, I am crazy like that. So the reason actually why I'm live every single night, day and night, depending on where you're at. So the reason I'm actually live daily is because in December of this previous year, after I had quit my job, started the writing business, I challenged myself. Can I write 30 minutes daily for a year? And this was entirely for me, because I've written so many things before, but I wanted to be consistent and I wanted to create a consistent practice for me. I just want to see if it was even possible, right? And then the reason that I live stream it is because I use the live stream, I use you guys to help keep me accountable. If I don't show up to I can't just not show up to a live stream by this point. Otherwise, I've broken the chain. So like, I feel pretty confident I'm going to be able to do it, whether in health or sickness. So that's why I'm doing it. And then throughout the process of doing these, I've ended up making it more of like an experience and a show, and I've added things onto it. But that's the basis of why I started it originally. So, but I appreciate you finding me. I'm actually really enjoying this. And I'm surprised that so far I've done 109 days, 109 episodes out of 366. So many more to come. I'm almost at the 33% mark. Almost there. Thanks for commenting, my man. Stephanie, let's see. I've been getting rid of a lot of dialogue tags. Yeah, so I think sometimes, because I want you to have fun, right? And I want us to be able to not be holding back when we're writing rough drafts. I think during the rough draft, it's actually a good idea to be saying too much, but know that like the more you say, the more you have to edit. And I know one of my problems and stuff, this is probably something we can both relate on, is that I tend to use too many speech tags in my rough draft. And I know that I'll have to cut back on some of them. Kind of like sometimes I'll use too many adjectives and adverbs and verbs to describe stuff. Now, like when I was in like my 20s, my early 20s, I would do way too much. I was really bad. That was like one of my major problems early on in my writing career. And like any problem, when you have a weakness, you figure out the weakness and you figure out how to improve on it 0.1% at a time. And eventually you just get better at it over time. So like I've definitely improved a lot where I'm at. I'm sure there's still elements where it comes through, but I wouldn't say that is my major weakness now. I would say, that's a good question. When I think about my writing style, I probably have to pull back and look at this. When I look at the story, I'll kind of see what really stands out. I think the challenge has been doing this as a live stream format has been kind of like getting me into like a different like writing state of mind to be able to like actually write the stories and do it for myself, and then also be catering to the live format as well. So I found it very interesting. Another really common a dialogue problem. This is like, if you've done this in your stories, it's all good. But I see this so commonly with writers. Quotation marks are only used if a character is speaking. I'm going to repeat myself. Quotation marks can only be used if a character is verbally saying something. a lot of the times with certain things, like certain things set in interiority, like certain things that characters are thinking, or sometimes in certain formatting, especially for writers who are still getting like the hang of formatting. Sometimes they will use things like apostrophes instead of the quotation marks, but that doesn't work. So like the quotation marks, that's like a common industry standard. Um, if you have a character speaking and you don't use quotation marks, you will confuse your audience. You'll confuse your readership. So quotation marks only when a character is speaking. Now, let's say a character is like thinking something. They're like, for instance, because Last Scarecrow's on my mind, right? So let me think. Example: Last Scarecrow was running up the hill. He thought, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I'm going to die. The last Scarecrow fell over and rolled down the hill. In this example, right, his thinking, oh, this is the hardest thing done in my life. I'm going to die. If I wanted to like highlight a moment of that, if I really wanted it to stand out, instead of using quotation marks, I would actually use the I'm going to die, that specific sentence or that specific part of the sentence. I would either italicize it, or I could bold it as well. That doesn't always work with formatting styles, but I would italicize it to make it stand out if I really wanted to. I think with interiority, if you want to like really highlight, you probably could use an apostrophe in that instance, but I'd have to double check on the correct usage just to be certain. So let's see, John. I like speech tags. I am not patient with reading, and I am trained on classics. Yeah, especially with like reading classic novels, John. Classic reading is a whole different beast entirely, so to speak. I actually used to work in a lot of bookstores, and I loved switching between reading a classic novel and then reading like an epic fantasy or a horror or sci-fi. And I would go back and forth. Favorite classic novel will always be Don Quixote. Ooh, probably followed by Dante's Inferno. Oh, I love those two. Love the character journeys. Let's see, I will consider dropping them, but currently if I remove them from my work, it would disrupt the flow. Yeah, and I think that's all right. So I think with speech tags, I think it's just if you're working on your rough draft, it's something to be aware of, right? As you're working through it. And you just want to be asking yourself, right? Is the dialogue tag for this character, what this character is saying, is it necessary? If I took the dialogue tag out, does it still make sense? And like I said, for my own writing, I use a lot of dialogue tags because I use them intentionally with the character's action. I very rarely ever have it be like character said this or dialogue, character said, period. I very rarely do that. And that's just my personal style. Usually I do like dialogue, character exclaimed, and they did a thing. It's my personal style. Usually I think what works well, kind of like what I was saying with Stephanie earlier, was it's a good awareness for when you're working on like the second draft or when you're editing and kind of looking at like, okay, when I'm editing page by page, now I can kind of see like, okay, do these dialogue tags work? Do they not? And then you can kind of cut them out. That way you won't disrupt your flow. Absolutely. Let's see. I'm problem with writing is I either over explain things or I don't explain things enough. Yeah, that's always a challenge, right? So like when we're writing our stories, it's like, how do we find the right balance? How do we find that like happy medium where if I had a reader who was reading this page, right? And it's enough detail so that way they get the basis of it, and then they can picture the rest in their mind, but it's not too much that we're telling them, right? And I think that's one of the not greatest, but that's a really big challenge and an opportunity for writers. And I think that goes into a huge style portion as well, right? Certain writers are going to do way more showing. They're going to do way more, what's the right way to say it? So they will do less description and let the character's actions and the things happening in the scenes speak for themselves because they want the reader to use more of their imagination. Other writers, and I say this in action epic fantasies all the time, like to use way more description to lay out the forest, the setting, the sun, the clouds, the earth, the air, all the different things, because they like to set the world so the world is clear. And sometimes they like to really describe the character, right? Sometimes they want you to know that you're looking at an elf with blonde hair, wrinkles, blue eyes, pointy ears, crystal white teeth, a vocal quality that could make you laugh with joy. Some writers like to go into that level of detail. And I think trying to figure out whether it's too much or too little, I think that that comes down to what your personal style is and what your intent is for the reader experience. So I think for you, Stephanie, what I'd recommend is ask yourself, like kind of as you're writing or as you're going through your editing process, if you were a reader, what do you want the experience to be for your reader? Do you want your reader to have that experience of like you're giving them more things to think about, like you're painting more of the picture for them? Or do you want your reader to have the experience of, okay, a couple key details, I want to use my imagination? I honestly don't think there's a right or a wrong way to that opportunity, challenge, or problem, in honesty. Now, there can be times where like I said earlier, like this, one of my early problems was using not necessarily too much description, but too much word choice, right? I would use too many adjectives, verbs, and adverbs to describe things. And I think that's different than using more descriptions, right? It's one thing to describe a lot of things. It's a different thing to use too many words. So that way it just sounds cluttered, right? It's like, I think, let me think if I can think of a good example. Let me think. I'll throw up my screen for a second. Let's see, a good example. The last scarecrow started singing louder and louder while running extra fast up the hill while during the wettest, most terrifying, unimaginable snowstorm known to the history of mankind's greatest tragedy ever meant to strike the Earth's core. And that is what we like to call a run-on sentence. I was being a little extra, seeing if I could come up with a good run-on sentence. The last scarecrow started singing louder and louder while running extra fast up the hill during the wettest, most terrifying, unimaginable snowstorm known to the history of mankind's greatest tragedy ever meant to strike the Earth's core. Kind of doesn't sound right. I mean, I think if I added some grammar fixes, it might make it work. But overall, it just sounds cluttered, right? If you have a single sentence, like you don't want, I think that the best way to think about it, Stephanie, with writing too much or too little, I think another good thing somebody told me once is and this is actually probably good for you because you do a lot of speech to text. Can you say a single sentence without running out of breath? If you're saying a sentence and you feel like you can't get through it in one breath, or you're trying like too much, it's too long. That's actually a really good best practice somebody told me one time. And I think was just one of those things that kind of stuck with me. Said you're okay stopping at tragedy. Okay. Well, I mean, that's good. You're saying like Oh yeah, with my example. Yeah, I would say like from my example, I was like, let's say I'm going to strike the Earth's core. Like I said, I was definitely being extra with this. Well, let's say like so the last scarecrow started singing louder and louder while running extra fast up the hill during the wettest, most terrifying, unimaginable snowstorm known to the history of mankind's greatest tragedy. I think my only challenge with this, so the thing is like there's so much description that's going on here, and we could actually make it easier. So the last scarecrow started. Why instead of started, I'm going to just make the action a present moment to minimize word choice. So I'm going to say the last scarecrow sang, saying the last scarecrow sang louder. There's probably a better word choice for louder. Saying, although actually, like the last, you probably actually don't even need to say the volume, right? So without saying louder, it's assumed the last scarecrow is probably singing at a decent quality, right? So you could say the last scarecrow sang while running. Now, why do we need extra fast? He's running up a hill. Extra fast is just extra too much wording. I could say the last scarecrow sang while running, and I would actually even change running to be while dashing, makes it just a little more interesting to me. While dashing up the hill during, and instead of the, during, no, I like during the wettest. A snowstorm is already going to be wet. So wettest is extra. So I'd say during an unimaginable, and I could either use terrifying or unimaginable. During a terrifyingly unimaginable. No, I would go during a terrifying snowstorm. During the most terrifying snowstorm known to the history of mankind's greatest tragedy. I would replace this with during the most terrifying snowstorm ever witnessed. Last scarecrow sang while dashing up the hill during the most terrifying snowstorm ever witnessed on Earth. Says the same thing, more succinct, and I've cut out all the extra word choice. And like one could argue, right? There's certain things like, okay, well, maybe the scarecrows, like the singing volume could be adjusted, right? Maybe I need them to know that he's blurting it out and he's doesn't sound that great. Maybe you want your reader to know that they're not just running, they're jogging so much that they're going to be out of shape by the time they get to the top. Maybe you need to go into description about how bad this snowstorm is because it's important to the plot. So what I would do is I would leave it like this, but then I would hop into the next sentence to describe the specific thing in more detail, right? Because the first sentence already painted a description, and then the paragraph, beginning, middle, end of a paragraph, the beginning, middle, end of a paragraph will let me actually explain what's going on. And that way, if I wanted to focus on like snowstorm, all right, let me go talk about the snowstorm. Snowstorms. He knew snowstorms killed scarecrows. He wanted to cry. Yet he sang anyways. There we go, right? So now I added some irony to it. Not irony, I added some comedy to it. And I'm not even a comedian. There's my little example. Let's see. I'm okay. I like to throw in a run-on sentence and every now and then as a joke, right? And you see like the difference, John, is you're using that as an intentional choice, right? And it once again goes back to know the rules before we can break them. Are there times in stories where we can use a run-on sentence? Absolutely. Are there times where we can use dialogue tags every time or not every time? Absolutely. For every rule, you're going to find a story, you're going to find an example where the author does the exact different, and that's all right. The reason they can do it differently is because they understand the rules. And because they understand the rules, they know why they're breaking the rules to further the story, the plot, or the character. There's a difference between making an intentional choice for your story and then it happening as a result of either just not being aware of the problem or not being able to come up with the right solution. So that's probably good. You probably have some really funny jokes in your stuff then. Let's see, remove extra, terrifying, then I like it better. Oh, let's see, remove extra, terrifying. Yeah. It's like the last scarecrow saying while dashing up the hill during the most terrifying snowstorm ever witnessed on Earth. You see, like, I actually don't even like Earth anymore. I would say last scarecrow saying while dashing up the hill during the most terrifying snowstorm ever witnessed. He knew snowstorms killed scarecrows. He wanted to cry, yet he sang anyways. Let's see. Mommy Telly. During a terrifying snowstorm, the last scarecrow sang while dashing up the hill. Right? And you see that's another way to, that would be another way to word it, actually. Right? And you see it completely comes down to what would be the, it comes down to what would be the intent of the paragraph, right? So if I were to write it like that, during a terrifying snowstorm, the last scarecrow sang while dashing. Now, if I was editing this during it might actually be a little stronger if the focus was on the snowstorm. So if we're thinking about a paragraph structure and this being the first sentence, now I'm definitely going to be talking about the snowstorm in detail because that's what I'm dealing with. Whereas this one, let's see, scarecrow sing. The focus of this paragraph is on the scarecrow singing. The focus on this paragraph will be the terrifying snowstorm. It's just a difference of styles. Let's see, how do they sound when compared side to side? I'm curious. During a terrifying snowstorm, the last scarecrow sang while dashing up the hill. The last scarecrow sang while dashing up the hill during the most terrifying snowstorm ever witnessed. I kind of like yours a little bit more. Yours is a little bit more succinct. The last scarecrow sang while dashing up the hill during the most terrifying snowstorm ever witnessed. During a terrifying snowstorm, the last scarecrow sang while dashing up the hill. Good call out, Mama Telly. I think if I were rewriting this and editing, I would probably opt for this one because it's even shorter. And once again, it's that word choice. The shorter sentence that can achieve the same effect will always win, hands down. I don't know the rules and I break them anyway. That's funny, Stephanie. I think you gave yourself too little credit. I think when we think about rules of like dialogue, character, speech, like different things that we're familiar with, a lot of the times we learn a lot of these common practices and rules innately through reading stories throughout our life. The same reason that we actually learn a lot of best practice, like screenplay tips from watching movies and watching TV. Now, we don't always connect two and two together, but it's almost like it's a form of research. So we're almost inspired by the things that we're absorbing. Sometimes we just don't really recognize, but I feel like you know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. I love breaking writing rules. It sounds like both of you are big fans of breaking writing rules, which I actually I get that, right? Because we want to tell a story that nobody's heard before, that is a unique experience, and the only way to do that is doing it in a way that hasn't been done. And breaking the rules is one way to go about it. I think with my storytelling, as y'all have known from my as I've been working on Last Scarecrow, when my stories, I like to tell a story that has a strong theme that I care about while building unique characters that I love exploring their psychology, while also going about a plot that really that is unexpected. I love creating plots and narratives that are unexpected. Like I love setting up, building stakes, and then surprising. I love the surprise element. I like the simplicity in that, mommy. Yep, completely agreed. Mommy, tell it. Sounds like once again your version wins. I'd agree. I like to restructure so I don't sound too repetitive and waste words. It's an absolutely great thing. I end up doing that literally all the time with editing, like hands down. Whenever I'm editing for like either my own writing or whether I'm editing for a client, you always have to pull back and ask yourself, like, as you're going like paragraph by paragraph or page by page, how are you like editing the things down to make them still achieve what you're trying to achieve, but still make them as succinct as possible. Absolutely. Sounds like you probably had a lot of really good practice with like bringing editing down stories, either your own work or others' work before. Maybe consider them as guidelines as opposed to rules. That's a good way. It's really just framing the way you look at it, right? So whether you want to call it rules, guidelines, signposts, tips, theories, rhythms, not rhythms, but you get the point. I think it's just a matter of word choice. I think it's just how we look at it. Technically, a rule is only a rule because it's been commonly established by the norm or by main society, right? So I think it's being aware of why something is the way it is. I like to try to understand the reasoning behind systems before breaking them. But that could just be a me thing, right? Maybe I just like to understand. I'm like, okay, if I understand it, then I can break it with intentionality. Let's see. I was also going through my order draft of something that you read on Saturday. Actually did go into more detail, and for some reason, I left it out on my newer draft. Oh, that sucks. I was like, clearly you need to like add that to the newer draft. It's going through the older draft something that you're on Saturday, and actually did go into more detail. It's unfortunate. Well, it's all good. I mean, if I end up doing more excerpts from the story, then hopefully just like send me the newer version so I could dig into the newer version. That's like totally happened to me before, right? Especially when we're working on multiple drafts. Sometimes like some of the drafts could get out of order. I have like so many files and things that I have to keep separate. Otherwise, I'll like get lost with my own writing. I totally get that. All right. So I feel like that was a good mix of some dialogue chat, some good stuff on dialogue conversations, and some other just like miscellaneous stuff. As always, I want to give a big heart, a big tipping my beanie to you and appreciating that you take time to come chill and come hang out with us. As always, it's the writing community that you didn't know that you needed, that we're here now. So thank you for joining. As we look forward to tomorrow, tomorrow is going to be my favorite, which will be, I was like making sure that I got it right. I want to say that I went with Fiction Character Friday. So tomorrow we're going to focus on character development, which is my favorite. If you've been watching along in Last Scarecrow, you know I love character development. Clearly, I've developed like probably like anywhere between 20 to 40 animals in this post-apocalyptic world. So join me tomorrow, same time, same place, 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I'll be here, and I'm having so much fun Last Scarecrow. I think at some point I might just do like a couple hour theme because I really want to make some more progress on it. I'm like excited with where I'm at right now. Let's see. I like these live streams. Nice. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you've been able to find this and join, John. I'm going to be rewriting the whole book. I'm just happy. Yep, you gotta save your old drafts. Absolutely. I like don't delete anything more these days. As always, thanks again for hosting. Anytime. I enjoy this. I could be in like any mood and like I do these and I just get like so uplifted by the experience. Later, Kauffman. I'll shoot you an email soon. I was busy today rewriting the beginning of my novel. Yeah, absolutely. Whenever's a good time for you, my man. Anytime you want to connect, I would love to help you out with your writing at all. 100%. And then let's see. By the way, like the stream on your way out. Let me know that that you enjoyed the stream. And if you're looking for something to watch and you haven't already, make sure to go check out the Right Now podcast on my YouTube channel, Kauffman's Corner. Turning out to be the most successful stream so far. It was very informative on how to craft a novel that matters. So it was a good little stream. That's all that I got for you today, writer friends. Don't forget, words are wind, but stories are forever. I'm Kauffman, and I'll catch you on the morrow.